Well, hey there, and welcome back to Heimler's History. In this video, we're going to consider yet another one of your required Supreme Court cases for the AP government curriculum, namely Roe v. Wade in 1972. So if you're ready to get them brain cows milked, well then let's get to it. So before we jump in, let me just say this is probably the most controversial case that you have to know for the AP government curriculum, and as such, I'm just outlining the facts of the case and how it was decided. People on both sides of this decision feel very deeply about its implications, so, I'm not going to be cracking any jokes or making light of anything. We're just going to talk about the case itself. So as always, let's begin with the facts of the case. In the 1930s, many states noticed a big problem, namely that many women were obtaining illegal abortions, and because they were illegal, they were not performed safely, and thus many women were falling severely ill or in some cases dying. And it was right about then that many states started liberalizing their abortion laws to try to offer women the option for safe abortion. Now, a group of Catholic physicians were the first to seriously oppose this liberalization of abortion laws, and the reason that they did so was because according to the Catholic worldview, defined by natural law, life began at conception, and thus to perform an abortion was no different than killing a human being outside the womb. Nevertheless, many states decided to grant further access to abortion because of the public health crisis caused by the high number of illegal abortions. Okay, now fast forward a few decades to the women's rights movement of the 60s and the 70s, and one of the key tenets of this movement was the full-scale legalization of abortion. For women's rights advocates, having control over their body was essential to their equality with men, and thus they argued that open access to abortion was necessary for that equality to be realized. By that point, Catholics still argued against abortion on demand, but they had now been joined by various other conservative groups, especially evangelical Christians, who were nervous about what abortion on demand would mean for what they understood as the declining morality of America. Okay, so it's against that backdrop that a Texas woman named Norma McCorvey, who because of the contentious nature of the case was identified only as Jane Roe, sought to get an abortion. Now, the law in Texas only allowed for abortion in cases where the mother's life was in danger, and so she could not get the abortion that she wanted, and so finally this case wound up before the Supreme Court. Okay, so what was the constitutional principle at stake in this case? Well, the answer is a little complicated. Now, you'll no doubt know by this point that none of the amendments in the Bill of Rights says anything about a woman's right to an abortion. So what was the argument based on? Well, ultimately it was based on a woman's right to privacy. Now again, that's not explicitly mentioned in the Bill of Rights, but the argument went like this. The court agreed that a right to privacy, while not explicitly mentioned, was for sure implicitly mentioned in the 1st, 4th, 5th, 9th, and 14th Amendments. And here's what they mean. For example, the 4th Amendment says that citizens have the right not to have their homes and personal effects searched without a warrant. That, the justices argued, implies a right to privacy in one's personal space and belongings. The First Amendment recognizes the right to choose any kind of religious belief you want and to keep that decision away from the prying eyes of the government. So that's the kind of thing they mean when they say that the right to privacy is implicit in those amendments. But ultimately, this case came down to the implicit right to privacy embedded in the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Okay, so now let's see how the court decided this case. In a 7-2 decision, the court ruled that the restrictive abortion laws in Texas violated Roe's constitutional right to privacy, namely to make decisions about her own body in obtaining an abortion. However, the justices acknowledged that there was a balance to strike between a woman's unmitigated right to privacy and the state's potential interest in the child's life. Therefore, the decision offered different strictures based on the trimester of pregnancy. In the first trimester, states could not legally restrict abortion. In the second trimester, states could make reasonable restrictions as long as they were related to maternal health. And in the third trimester, states may prohibit abortions entirely except in cases where the mother's life was in danger. Okay, now why does this case matter? First of all, in the wake of the Roe decision, a majority of states had to rewrite and liberalize their abortion laws, which granted women easier access to abortions across the nation. Second, this case matters because it became a clear crack in the foundation of American culture. After Roe, liberals and conservatives grew further apart and became unwilling to compromise on many issues. In fact, overturning Roe has been one of the key motivating energies for conservatives winning the presidency since the decision was handed down. Remember, the president is the one who appoints justices to the Supreme Court, and Republicans have long sought to shift the court majority to the conservative side in order to overturn Roe. And at the time of this recording, the Republicans have indeed done that, but whether they will overturn Roe remains to be seen. Okay, I hope that helped. If you want even more help, then you can click right here and grab my review packet, which is going to help you get an A in your class and a 5 on your exam in May. I've got videos on all the other required Supreme Court cases right here, so click away if that's something that you're into. Subscribe if you want me to keep making these videos, and I shall surely oblige. Heimler out.